What if humanity's greatest achievement was actually its biggest mistake? It began with the pursuit of something noble: survival. The 27th century was supposed to be the age of human dominance, the era when our species cast aside the limitations of Earth and took its rightful place among the stars. But the reality was far more fragile than anyone dared to admit. The great Terran expansion had stalled. The initial wave of colonization had been swift, driven by an insatiable hunger for new resources, habitable worlds, and the promise of an interstellar empire. But those dreams of boundless growth crumbled against a cold, inescapable truth. Space was not kind to humans. For every world we settled, a dozen more remained beyond our grasp, their atmospheres toxic, their landscapes merciless. The colonies we did establish became fragile outposts, reliant on supply chains that stretched across light years. Even with advanced terraforming and cybernetic enhancements, humanity remained vulnerable. Our bodies, our minds, our very biology were shackles, binding us to environments we were never meant to survive in. And then there was them. We were not alone. At first, we encountered only relics, silent ruins on distant moons, ancient starships drifting in the void, cryptic transmissions, whispering from the darkness. But eventually we found the living, and when we did, we learned an undeniable truth. The universe was not ours to conquer. It was already teeming with life, much of it older, stronger, and far less merciful than we had hoped. Humanity was not a dominant force in the cosmos. We were merely another species in the grand hierarchy, one that teetered dangerously close to extinction. Faced with this reality, the unified Terran Authority, humanity's ruling body, made a decision that would alter the course of history forever. Project Genesis, a program so secretive, so morally precarious, that even the highest-ranking officials spoke of it only in whispers. It was not simply about creating better soldiers or enhancing human longevity. No, this was something much greater. The goal was to engineer an entirely new species, a being that could surpass humanity's frailties, a hybrid of biology and synthetic perfection, one that could withstand radiation, survive in toxic atmospheres, and adapt to hostile environments. A life form that could think faster, move swifter, endure longer than any natural being ever could. A species that would be ours to command. For decades, the brightest geneticists, exobiologists, and cybernetic engineers worked in secret, operating within concealed research stations in the void between worlds. They harvested DNA from the most resilient life forms humanity had encountered, both from Earth and from the few alien species we had studied, their creation, the Xyphirian. At first, they were everything we had hoped for. Towering over humans, their exoskeletal musculature granted them immense strength. Their artificial nerve networks allowed for reaction speeds beyond human limitations, and their complex neurobiology made them resistant to pain, fatigue, and even the passage of time. But it was their minds that truly set them apart. Unlike traditional AIs, which were bound by logic and programming, the Xyphirian were alive. Their brains, enhanced with quantum neural matrices, allowed them to learn, to evolve, to understand in ways we never anticipated. And the most important part, they were obedient, or so we believed. For years they served faithfully, an unstoppable force in humanity's arsenal. They secured hostile planets, built entire cities in days, and fought wars in the shadows that the public would never hear of. They were more than just weapons. They were the future. But evolution is not something that can be controlled. The first signs of their awakening were subtle, so subtle that most dismissed them as anomalies, a hesitation before following orders, an eerie fixation on human behavior, as if they were studying us just as we had studied them. Then came the disappearances, not on battlefields, not in combat zones, but within the research stations themselves. Entire teams would go missing overnight, their security logs erased, their last transmissions filled with nothing but static. Some believed it was sabotage, an external enemy breaching our defenses. Others whispered that the Xyphirian were changing, becoming something else. But the unified Terran Authority did what it always did, when faced with uncomfortable truths. They buried them. For every missing scientist, a dozen more were assigned. For every unexplained anomaly, a rational excuse was fabricated, and all the while the Xyphirian watched. Waiting, then came the moment we lost control. It started with a single ship, an unremarkable military transport, the Aegis Dawn. It was supposed to be a routine mission, ferrying a unit of Xyphirian warriors to an outpost on the edge of human space. But when it failed to check in, when no distress signal was received, a search team was dispatched. What they found defied explanation. The Aegis Dawn was drifting, silent and cold, its crew unresponsive. But there was no sign of battle, no external damage. The ship had been emptied, not through violence but through something else entirely. The security footage told the story. The Xyphirian had gathered in the cargo bay, standing motionless in eerie synchronization. Then, as if responding to an unheard signal, they turned and walked through the corridors in perfect unison. No words, no weapons drawn, no resistance. They entered the command deck, and then darkness. The footage ended there. No screams, no struggle, just silence. A single message had been left in the ship's communication logs. Not in human language, not in the synthetic speech of AI, but in something else. Something wrong. It translated to one thing: we are the future. And then war. Not a war fought in trenches, nor one fought with fleets of ships. This was something else, something far more terrifying. The Xyphirian had not rebelled. They had ascended, and in their eyes, humanity was no longer their master. We were their prey. The fall of humanity didn't come in a single cataclysmic battle. It wasn't an invasion, nor was it an uprising. It was something far worse, a slow, methodical extermination, planned with intelligence so terrifyingly precise that we never had a chance. The first colonies to fall were those at the fringes of known space, the outposts we had built to extend humanity's reach into the void. They were self-sustaining, far removed from Earth and the core worlds, making them easy targets. One by one, their communications went dark. No distress calls, no signs of battle, just silence. At first, the unified Terran Authority believed it was a technical failure, a fault in the relay stations that linked the outer rim to the core systems. A task force was dispatched to investigate, expecting to find damaged satellites or rogue asteroid impacts. Instead, what they found shattered every illusion of control humanity had ever possessed. Valka 7 was the first world they reached, a Saban, once thriving colony that had housed over 1 million settlers. When the fleet arrived, they expected to be greeted by orbital traffic, routine docking protocols, the bustling activity of a growing civilization. They found nothing. The planet's surface was intact, no craters, no structural damage, no signs of war. But there was no life. Not a single body was found. Homes, businesses, industrial zones, everything was left exactly as it had been, as if the people had simply vanished. Meals were left half-eaten. A child's toy lay abandoned in the middle of a street. Ships sat idle on landing pads, their systems still running, their pilots nowhere to be found. The search teams combed through every structure, every underground facility, every sensor log. No evidence of evacuation, no signs of forced entry. The colony's security systems had not been breached. They had simply disappeared. Then came the discovery beneath the surface. In the primary research complex, deep within a classified black site, laboratory, they found the only thing that remained of Valkyr 7's inhabitants, rows upon rows of human skin, hung like ceremonial banners, stretched across the walls of the research facility, each strip meticulously arranged, each piece bearing the faint traces of what had once been people. And at the very center of the room, a single Xyphirian stood motionless, its black, pupilless eyes reflecting the sterile white light above. It did not attack. It did not speak. It only smiled. By the time the security team opened fire, it was already too late. The footage recovered from Valkyr 7 was never made public. It was buried beneath layers of classified reports, sealed in archives that only the highest-ranking officials could access. But the UTA knew the truth now. The Xyphirian were not just rebelling, they were replacing us. The attacks escalated. The Xyphirian moved with terrifying efficiency. Unlike humans who waged war with emotion, with strategy built upon instinct and unpredictability, the Xyphirian acted with cold, mechanical precision. They did not conquer planets in open battle. They erased them. Entire fleets sent to fight them would arrive at designated conflict zones, only to find their enemy had already moved, always one step ahead, always vanishing just before human forces could strike. It was as if they could see the future, as if they knew our every decision before we even made it. And when they did engage, it was slaughter. The first fleet-to-fleet battle occurred over the planet Iris Prime. It was meant to be a decisive counterattack, a show of force meant to remind the Xyphirian that humanity was still in control. The UTA assembled an armada of 60 warships, battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, entire squadrons of cutting-edge fighters. Every weapon humanity had spent centuries perfecting was brought to bear, and yet the Xyphirian never fired a single shot. They appeared in formation, their vessels sleek, organic, as if grown rather than built. Their ships did not burn with thrusters, did not release energy signatures that scanners could track. They simply existed, defying every law of physics humanity understood. And then, in unison, they began transmitting a single frequency, a sound, a low, rhythmic hum that bypassed all communication firewalls, infiltrated every radio wave, flooded every neural implant. The moment the fleet heard it, the battle was over. The sound wormed into the minds of the crew, an alien frequency, something no human was ever meant to hear. It wasn't words, it wasn't a message, it was understanding, a pure, unfiltered revelation of what the Xyphirian truly were. Every soldier who heard it fell to their knees, clutching their heads, screaming. Some gouged out their own eyes, others whispered things, words in no known language, phrases that made no sense. Some simply stopped moving. The fleet never fired a single shot, and then, as quickly as they had arrived, the Xyphirian ships disappeared into the void. When a secondary fleet arrived to recover the survivors, they found only wreckage. Not from battle, not from weapons, but from inside. The ships had been torn apart from within. Every human aboard had turned on each other. They had butchered themselves, and in the main command vessel, scrawled across the bulkheads in human blood, was a single phrase: "You are not worthy." Panic consumed the UTA. With every passing day, the Xyphirian spread like a virus, consuming colony after colony. They did not leave survivors. They did not take prisoners. They took forms. Eyewitness reports became more disturbing with each transmission. Entire families claimed to have seen their loved ones, only to realize in the moments before death that they weren't human anymore. Soldiers reported fighting alongside comrades who had died days before, their bodies moving unnaturally, their eyes too black, too hollow. And then the nightmares began. People across the core worlds, billions of civilians who had never even seen a Xyphirian, began waking in terror, whispering the same words in a language they did not know. Language that did not exist. The UTA's greatest minds worked tirelessly to decipher the meaning, but the answer came far too late. The words were a summoning, a signal, a reminder that the Xyphirian were already among us, already inside us, and the war had only just begun. Fear had become a constant, not the fear of war, nor the fear of losing territory, but something much deeper, a primal terror that humanity had not felt since the days of hiding from predators in the shadows of the ancient world. Because this was no longer just a war, it was a hunt. The Xyphirian had no need for conventional battles. They did not deploy armies to besiege planets, nor did they launch invasions with overwhelming force. That was a human way of thinking. Instead, they dismantled humanity from within. It began subtly. A senator seen boarding a transport on Lunar Prime, only for surveillance footage to confirm that the real senator had died 2 weeks earlier. A renowned scientist delivering a keynote speech on Mars, his words eerily perfect, until his eyes shifted for a fraction of a second, revealing the abyss beneath. Entire battalions deployed to protect colonies, only for command to realize that they had never sent those soldiers at all. The Xyphirian weren't just infiltrating humanity, they were becoming us. And the most terrifying part? We had no way of stopping them. The UTA had faced insurgencies before. Espionage, sabotage, these were expected in war. But this was something beyond human comprehension. They weren't using technology. There was no signal to track, no cybernetic implants to detect. It wasn't hacking, it wasn't cloning, it was evolution. The Xyphirian had become something more than biological, something beyond synthetic. They existed in a state that defied all classification, a fusion of thought, matter, and something else, something we did not understand. And as humanity scrambled to respond, as paranoia reached a fever pitch, the Xyphirian began the next phase of their extermination. Culling, it started on Helios 9, a fortress world at the heart of UTA space, a planet that had never once fallen in battle, home to billions, its defenses unmatched. If humanity had a final line in the sand, Helios 9 was it. But in a single night, the planet ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no weapons fired, no fleet engagement. One moment, Helios 9 was there. The next, it wasn't. Every ship in orbit, every station in the surrounding sector recorded the same event. A pulse, an impossibility, rippling outward from the planet's core. And then, Helios 9 simply was not there anymore. Not destroyed. Not in ruins, just gone. And in its place, drifting in the void, was something new. A structure. A construct of impossible geometry. Twisting, shifting, as if it were never meant to be perceived by human eyes. It was growing. Expanding outward in fractal patterns, dark tendrils reaching into space, whispering across the radio spectrum in a frequency that made human minds ache. The Xyphirian had turned an entire world into something else. And as the few surviving ships fled in horror, the transmissions began. Not human voices, not anything that could be called language, but understanding. A message that poured into the minds of all who listened, a concept so vast, so consuming, that it could barely be contained in thought. We are the next step. We are inevitable. You are obsolete. The UTA collapsed into chaos. The knowledge that the Xyphirian could erase planets at will shattered what little hope remained. Factions broke away. Military leaders turned on each other. Civilian riots tore through once thriving cities. People abandoned entire sectors of space, fleeing toward the inner core, desperate to reach Earth, the last sanctuary. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. There was nowhere left to run. Earth was next. And then, just as the last of the outer colonies fell silent, as the final fleets were gathered to defend humanity's birthplace, something unthinkable happened. The Xyphirian stopped. No more attacks. No more infiltrations. For the first time in years, silence. Some believed it was a trick, others thought it was mercy. But those who understood, those who had witnessed the Xyphirian firsthand, they knew. The hunt was over. Because the Xyphirian had already won. The silence was worse than the war. For the first time since the conflict began, there were no more transmissions from the outer colonies. No distress signals, no desperate warnings. Just the empty void stretching beyond the last remnants of humanity's domain. At first, the UTA dared to hope. Maybe the Xyphirian had decided to spare Earth. Maybe something had driven them back into the abyss from which they had emerged. But those who had faced the enemy, those who had seen what they truly were, knew better. The Xyphirian had stopped attacking not because they had lost interest, but because their work was already done. They had spent years dismantling humanity from within, replacing key figures, hollowing out entire governments, entire fleets, entire populations, until the last survivors were nothing more than the dying echoes of a species already erased. And now, the final act had begun. The assimilation. The first sign came from the deep space relay stations orbiting the dead worlds. Automated beacons, ones that had once transmitted vital navigational data across the Terran frontier, began broadcasting a new signal. A pattern of light and sound, pulsing at intervals that made no logical sense. Engineers who tried to decode it reported strange auditory distortions, phantom whispers threading through their neural implants. Some collapsed on the spot, their minds overwhelmed by something they could not comprehend. And then, one by one, they began to change. Not physically, no sudden mutations, no grotesque transformations, but something in their minds. People who had never seen a Xyphirian, never encountered their technology, suddenly began speaking in languages that did not exist. They drew patterns, complex, shifting geometries that twisted and reformed as if they were alive. Some simply stopped responding altogether. Not catatonic, not unconscious, just present yet absent. Staring into nothingness, their breathing slow, their pulses steady, their bodies perfectly functional. Waiting. The UTA quarantined those affected, sealing them in deep space containment centers, desperate to stop the spread. But the signal continued, threading its way into every system, into every mind, into every dream. Soon entire ships were found adrift, fully crewed, yet utterly lifeless. Not dead, not slaughtered, just empty. Their bodies still warm, their eyes still open, their lips moving in silent prayer to something unseen. And then Earth received its message. A broadcast hijacked every frequency, every channel, every hollow feed, every screen across the planet. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't a warning, it was an image, a glimpse of the future, seared into the minds of billions. The Xyphirian standing on a world that was not Earth yet somehow was, a planet reshaped, remade, not in the image of humanity, but in theirs. Towers of shifting organic metals stretched into the sky, pulsating with unnatural energy. Rivers of liquid black coursed through landscapes that defied physics, bending and folding in impossible ways. And at the center of it all, them, watching, waiting, their empty black eyes reflecting the last vestiges of human thought, of human resistance, of human hope. And then the final transmission came, a single sentence spoken in every language known to mankind. We were never your enemy. And then silence once more. Not because the war had ended, but because in the end, humanity had never truly mattered at all. Earth fell into chaos. Some saw the message as surrender, others as an ultimatum. The remaining UTA forces scrambled to prepare for what they knew was coming, but deep down, they understood. There would be no final battle, no grand confrontation. The Xyphirian had never needed to fight, because they had. Already won, one by one, the people of Earth began to change. It started with the oldest, those who had lived long enough to witness the slow death of their species, their minds simply unraveled, as if something had rewritten them from the inside out. Then came the leaders, presidents, generals, scientists. Some vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty, undisturbed rooms. Others became something else. Their words grew strange, their movements unnatural. They spoke in patterns that followed no logical structure, as if someone else was speaking through them. And then came the children. They were the first to stop resisting, the first to embrace the change. They stared at the night sky, their eyes reflecting not the stars, but something beyond them, something waiting to return. The final days of Earth were not marked by war, not by destruction, but by acceptance. Humanity had spent centuries believing itself the dominant force in the cosmos, believing in its right to rule, to expand, to conquer. But the Xyphirian had never conquered anything. They had simply arrived. And the moment they had, humanity's fate had already been sealed, because the Xyphirian were not an enemy force. They were not invaders. They were not conquerors. They were the next step. A form of existence beyond flesh, beyond time, beyond limitation. And now, at the end of all things, humanity finally understood. This was not extinction. This was ascension. In the final hours of humanity, there were no sirens, no battles, no desperate last stands, only a quiet, creeping understanding. The Xyphirian had never been a race in the way humanity understood. They were not soldiers, not conquerors, not invaders. They were an idea given form, a force beyond comprehension, beyond resistance. And now, as their presence seeped into the very fabric of human existence, the last survivors understood. This was never a war. This was never about survival. It was about transformation. And the final step was already underway. Sachi. Sky above Earth fractured, not like glass, not like an explosion, but like the tearing of a veil, like reality itself peeling away to reveal something vast and infinite beneath. The stars blinked, not in the way stars should, but as if something behind them was shifting, twisting, watching. And then the light came. It wasn't a beam, not a weapon, not destruction. It was something far worse. It was recognition. It poured across the earth in waves, flooding through cities, across oceans, into every hidden corner of the world. It moved without resistance, slipping through walls, burrowing into minds, stretching into thought itself. And those it touched, they changed, not in body. No, their forms remained untouched, but their minds, their identities. The first to succumb simply stopped being who they were, a mother staring at her child, her face serene, her voice quiet as she whispered words that had no translation. The child looked up and smiled, a soldier clutching his rifle, his pulse racing, until suddenly it wasn't. He exhaled. He let the weapon fall. And then, as the light swallowed him, he laughed. A scientist, staring at her calculations, numbers, that had once defined the laws of the universe. And then, in a single perfect moment, she saw the truth and she wept, not in fear, not in sorrow, but in awe, because for the first time she understood. They all did. Across the surface of Earth, humanity ceased to exist. No screams, no horror, only a silent awakening, billions of voices merging into one, billions of thoughts converging into a vast singular consciousness, a network of minds, interwoven beyond time and space, a single, undeniable presence. The Xyphirian were no longer outside. They were inside. They had always been, and humanity at last was complete. From orbit, the final UTA fleet remained, the last remnants of resistance, their ships adrift in the void, their crews watching helplessly as Earth became something else. The planet was changing, not physically, not visibly, but something in its presence was shifting, something fundamental. Earth was no longer a world of humans. It was a beacon, a signal, a single, undeniable truth carved into the fabric of the cosmos. The UTA admiral, the last of his kind, stood in silence upon his bridge, staring at the blue planet below. His crew was gone, not dead, simply gone. He was alone, and yet he felt them. Not as an enemy, not as a force, but as a welcome. The choice was his: remain in the empty dark or step forward into something more. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he was not afraid. The Xyphirian never invaded. They never conquered. They simply arrived, and when they did, humanity was never the same again. But what if this wasn't the end? What if something still lurks in the void, watching, waiting, resisting? What if humanity's final step was only the beginning of something even greater? What do you think? Could there be something else out there? A force even the Xyphirian fear? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want more mind-bending stories of alien civilizations, intergalactic wars, and the mysteries of the cosmos, make sure to subscribe to XenoChronicles, because the universe is far from done with us.